So, building upon our previous sessions, previous lectures, we are going to continue our topics, a discussion on topics on the most probable topics for this year's mains 2024. And it's a general discussion, not only for mains 2024. See, with UPSC, it's unpredictable. So, these will not only help 2024 aspirants, but in prelims 2025 also. But these have been now and again been repeatedly in the news. They have been in the spotlight, in the center, and that is why I appropriate feel it that it is appropriate to discuss such topics. So today we are going to take up the High Seas Treaty, which primarily deals with the ocean resources. And if I use the term which we often quote or write repeatedly, cliche term, the sustainable use of marine resources. Okay, so I've just emphasized in. So it is again, you might say, so what's new about this treaty? There are so many conventions, so many groupings, G7, G20, and whatnot, Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement. Then there are COPs and Montreal Protocol, whatnot. But actually, on the ground level, we know not much is being done about the towering or the impending crisis of climate change. So, is this another agreement in vain? We are going to discuss about that. So ocean resources, we basically ocean resources not only include the marine organisms, not only the marine flora and fauna, but also the energy resources. You can associate this topic with another widely attributed topic which is in the news about deep sea mining, polymetallic nodules we have discussed in one of the previous lectures. So if we can't discuss that topic, the seabed mining, so you can go ahead and read it on your own also, because this topic is exclusive of that particular topic. So first of all, what do we mean by high seas? Are we going to find any treasure or the sunken remains or wrecks of the Titanic, which sank in the Atlantic Ocean in 1912? No. High seas, in basic terms, they are outside, beyond the territorial jurisdiction of any sovereign country or nation. So you might have heard about EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone. Now here I would like to mention few terms. Just pay attention to this. You might have heard of UNCLOS, or if I want to improve the contrast a bit, you might have heard of UNCLOS, which is the United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Seas, which demarcates or decides various rights of passage and duties as well as sovereignty over the waters. Because land, we know it is easy to demarcate boundaries, no, not in countries like India, because the Britishers left us high and dry. Anyways, that is a topic for another day, another discussion. So basically, there is already UNCLOS, but high seas, whenever we go beyond the exclusive economic zones. Now, you must have studied this in prelims. So these are outside the EEZs or the territorial jurisdiction. Just to revise, I'll show you another diagram which properly delineates or demonstrates what the UNCLOS entails. Then the high seas. So they constitute 64% of the total ocean area. We know our planet is approximately 70% ocean, and out of that, if we exclude the EEZs, then we have 64% that is classified or categorized or defined as the high seas. Then here everyone enjoys equal rights, so go ahead and mine along and exploit the resources. Now you understand why we need a high seas treaty, because UNCLOS, it gives some principles about how to navigate or how to conduct your behavior, any nation's sovereign behavior over the seas, but it does not tell us how we are to proceed about following certain conventions and rules. So that is why we need. So it is, you might have read or come across this term, global commons. So obviously, the countries which have more control over resources, more wealth, more access to technology, they will be able to better exploit the resources. So the equity or equal sharing of benefits, which is there in UNCLOS as well, but it will not be easily implemented. So again, we need to prevent or protect this global rights, these rights of navigation, fishing, the the flights, the the exploration and the scientific research, and most of all, the sustainable use of resources and access and benefit sharing, which should be equally available to one and all. Then it is no one's responsibility, the high seas, because right now what the status of high seas treaty is. Finally, after 20 years of negotiations, it has been signed, it has been agreed upon. So recently, there are around 91 countries who are signatories to this treaty or convention, but not all of them had ratified it yet. There's a difference between ratification and signing the treaty. We'll discuss some examples as well. What is the difference? So currently, at eight, eight countries have ratified the treaty, out of which, along with India, is going to become one of the countries to again ratify the treaty. So, and the condition is when 60 countries will ratify the treaty, then this high seas treaty will be legally enforced. It will become an international law, not before it. And then, of course, the stats. So these are some figures in perspective. 17 million tons of plastics have been dumped alone in 2021. There are millions of tons, around 95, 75 to 95 million tons of plastic already present in the oceans. You might have heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So all these, the unnecessary or over exploitation, to control that, to sustainable development, for assessing the environmental adverse impacts, this high seas treaty is important. So some statistics in perspective. So this is just for additional fodder points. So protected areas, so marine protected areas, this term will come into picture now and again. Marine protected areas are similar to what you understand by the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, or biosphere reserves, but in the marine ecosystem. Okay, so these are the marine protected areas, and 1.44% of the high seas is currently demarcated as MPAs, and most of that MPAs, almost entire, is associated or located near Antarctica or the Antarctic continent. Now, some marine protected areas are also there in the territorial jurisdictions, but in the high seas, we are talking about high seas. Who is there to regulate the resources, the biodiversity, to protect and conserve the biodiversity? So that is why again we need the high seas treaty. In territorial areas and exclusive economic zones, there the countries, the territorial, the sovereign countries can establish some laws according to the UNCLOS as well. But for this 1.44% and other areas which are important from the point of view of biodiversity, they also need to be conserved. Then, out of totally currently identified 18,200 marine protected areas, fewer than 100 are in the high seas. So, high seas, these are only the identified. Also, we have not explored the ocean fully. So, there is still scope for further identification of MPAs. Kunming Montreal Protocol. So there is a Kunming Montreal Biodiversity Framework which deals with biodiversity, but how the High Seas Treaty will be able to implement or expedite this. It has a target of 30 into 30, that 30% of degraded coastal and marine ecosystems or protected areas, they are to be restored by 2030. So once the High Seas Treaty comes into action, it becomes an international law. This protocol will be easier to implement. Plastics, I told you 75 to 199 million, out of which around 17 million were dumped in 2021 itself. Then by 2050, there was a 2016 report by that so much of plastic is being dumped in the oceans that by 2050 there will be more plastics by weight as compared to fish. So that is a staggering. That is a going to be shocking stat. And one more thing, High Seas Treaty is also, if you see this term, BBNJ, so don't be afraid of this. This is another name for the High Seas Treaty. It stands for, so High Seas Treaty is also known as Agreement on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. We have already discussed, so no need to emphasize it further. So this is just a revision. Unclosed you should revise on its own. So here I can mark some areas. So basically this area, this blue area, this is more or less under the influence of unclosed, especially this to 12 nautical miles. 12 nautical miles. The nautical miles is the distance of measurement on the sea, on the ocean. So here, coastal country has territorial sovereignty, fishing rights, rights to mineral resources, and this always is under conflict one on the other. So like the best example or the worst example is the conflict of China with its neighboring countries in the South and East China Sea with Vietnam, Philippines, Japan, Taiwan. So basically, High Seas Treaty is expected to cater to reduction in such conflicts also. There is a hope. Then maximum 200 nautical miles or 200 sea miles from the baseline, or you can assume in layman terms, or to make simple things easier, from the coastal line. So here there is no territorial sovereignty, but it has exclusive fisheries and exclusive rights to marine resources, the mineral resources, okay, the energy resources. And this just a relation, if you have studied oceanography properly, studied you should have studied the different parts of the oceans and continents. So basically this portion, this is also part of the continent. This is known as the continental shelf. Here below this also there is continental crust. So this continental shelf has the majority of these. So for example, the offshore fields like the Krishna Godavari basin or the Mumbai High, which are used for extracting petroleum. So these are the offshore fields. And then it can be extended. The coastal activity or the EEZ can be extended to maximum 350 sea miles or 350 nautical miles. 200 nautical miles is approximately 370 kilometers. So this 350 miles or nautical miles, it can be attained post or subsequent to the agreement or consultation with the UNCLOS. Okay. And now this. So this is the scope of the UNCLOS. Now this area, you can see high seas, high seas. So this blue area, so here also UNCLOS applies in one way or other, but how the various procedures or various aspects, various clauses of UNCLOS have to be implemented, that implementing mechanism is not there. That is going to be provided by the High Seas Treaty. Right? So you for the UPSC exclusive UPSC students, we have continental slope, continental rise, deep sea plains or abyssal plains. Just revise, go ahead. So that is also important from the static perspective of means. Fine. So what does the just a summary of what does the UNCLOS we have been talking because UNCLOS or the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Seas, it will form the background to help us establish the fundamentals and the need for having a high seas treaty. So rights and duties of nations, it defines rights and duties of the nation. Here we have the navigation rights, the overflight, the use of marine resources, then even underlying the sea cables, underwater sea cables, scientific research. So, UNCLOS in itself has some clauses and aspects which have to be followed by nations who are party to this convention to follow this laws. Then sovereignty, passage rights, exclusive economic zone usages. So we have already discussed the territorial waters, how they are demarcated through the UNCLOS, obviously, because some countries are very small in size. So that is a topic for another day. Then demarcation of territorial waters, EEZs, to marking of the boundaries that is done according to the principles of UNCLOS. Then general principles of equitable access and usage. Now marine areas or marine protected areas or marine areas or oceans, seas, they are valuable because again tremendous amount of biodiversity is provided, marine resources, the cobalt crusts, these were recently in news, so you should go ahead and study this. Polymetallic, manganese nodules, methane hydrates, what else? Sulfur resources, sulfur compounds. Okay, so equal access. But again, the issue is there is equal access, but the country is having an unfair or distinct advantage in terms of resources, science, and other technological equipment they have, and no, an unequitable or non-equitable share over the exploitation. Then protection and conservation of biodiversity. But again, I am going to reiterate or repeat why we need a high seas treaty is to provide us or provide the planet or provide UNCLOS to be specific with an implementing mechanism to enforce all these principles or laws. Okay, so what is the issue? It doesn't specify how these objectives have to be achieved. So, just a little information and infographic about what marine protected areas mean. So, right, like I had told you in the beginning itself, you can consider it as a similar way of protection and conservation than in situ method of conservation, like the national parks, the wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves, and the marine ecosystems. Okay, so here we need more fish number. The this infographic, it demonstrates how the marine life is should be conserved in a marine protected area. How and when a particular marine ecosystem or marine area will be demarcated as an MPA. For that, we need to have a large number of fish of a particular species, then more species, the diversity, not only the number should be less, number should be more, but different species, the diversity should be there. And the bigger, the a proper food chain or food web should be established, and that will give us a productive and marine life and functional marine web, food web. Fine. So this is more animal plants, phytoplanktons, nectons, the pelagic elements, the lotic systems. Okay. Now this is just to illustrate some of the demarcated marine protected areas, mostly under the jurisdiction of the nations. So that 1.44% is on the high seas. These are basically near the continental shelves. So you can see this light blue part, if it is clear in the video. This light blue part, these are the continental shelves which lie under either the territorial waters or the exclusive economic zones, not the high seas, because there is no such treaty of declaring by a particular nation. It is a global common. So one country cannot do that. So, for example, Phoenix Islands, World Heritage Site also, hot biodiversity hotspot in Kiribati. Okay, then Great Barrier Reef Marine Park off the coast of Queensland in in Australia. Then Chagos Protected Area. This is under UK, right below Lakshadweep Islands and Maldives. Then marine parks of Mayotte, Prince Edward Islands. So these are some nations, either overseas territories or sovereign nations. Then this South Orkney Islands, South Georgia and South Sandwich Islands. Okay. Then Northeast Atlantic High Seas. So these more or less lie within or close to the territorial jurisdiction or the exclusive economic zones of countries. Okay, so objectives of the treaty. Now, this is now most important from the point of means because you need to provide specific points while writing an answer. So, conservation and protection of marine ecology. How does the treaty, High Seas Treaty, aim to establish or accomplish that by establishment of marine protected areas? So already some are identified, some can be demarcated as well, some can be assigned this particular status, and proper regulation, enforcement mechanisms, and tools can be offered or acceded to in order to perform or complete this objective. Then fair and equitable sharing of benefit from marine genetic resources. This is also a cliched statement. You might have heard about the Aichi targets, the biodiversity targets. A lot of protocol, one or two protocols are always there. So genetic resources, because even if a species goes extinct and we humans we have become experts, slowly becoming experts and making species go away. So if that genetic species or genetic resource is available to us, the genes, the genome is available, so that we can do some way, some or the other method in the future, maybe to revive that particular species. Okay. Then establish practice of mandatory EIAs, environmental impact assessment. So this topic not only pertains to GS1 but GS3 also, and you can also derive some points from the perspective of GS2 international relations, the conflicts which are taking place. So some points, environmental impact assessments. So whatever projects, it does not only include the assessment of the areas in the high seas, even the countries, if they are conducting any activities which are harmful to the MPAs outside their area of jurisdiction in the high seas, such as pollution, oil spills, these have become very common. Ocean acidification, now this is the responsibility of all the nations. So if any activity conducted by a particular nation is affecting the MPAs in the high seas, the biodiversity in the high seas, so this can be put in, though this can be implemented. And one more important point, this has to be in the public domain. Okay, the EIA assessments. Then, of course, again, another cliche say capacity building and transfer of marine technologies, so that the countries who are, especially the vulnerable, the low developed countries who are unable to fend for themselves or do not have enough funds for scientific research, they can expedite their scientific implementation, the scientific equipment, and conduct research and exploration in a sustainable way, along with conservation, taking into lieu the conservation methods. Now, mm, the critical analysis I'll do via the question, that will make it more interesting, because again, my structure of teaching, you already know what, why, then what are the imperatives or what constitutes that particular domain or topic, what are its implications, the flaws, and finally way forward. So an interesting way not to do it by via slide, but via question. So ratification. So once here already 91 countries have signed but not ratified. Only 8 countries have ratified the treaty or convention till now. Until and unless 60 countries ratify the treaty, this cannot come into force. And as soon as the 60th ratification comes into picture, it will take 120 days from that point onwards for the High Seas Treaty to go online or become legally effective. So, just to mention what is the difference between signing and ratification is signing means that these 91 countries have agreed that they would maybe abide or follow the principles and work like the directive, more or less like the directive principles of state policy, but they are not bound, legally bound. Here, once you have signed, you have to agree with the four major objectives and many other caveats or many other issues or clauses which are associated with the treaty with legal and moral obligations. If you don't follow them, a country who has ratified the treaty, if you don't follow that treaty, that nation will be scrutinized and reprimanded. Okay, so this is now again the main issue is the main task at hand is how to write an answer. So, just High Seas Treaty represents a significant step towards global ocean governance, critically analyze. So, as a diagram, there is not much scope, but you can mention some of you can draw a map, world map. You should now be able to draw a map and mark some of the places. So again, there is no model answer. I'm just giving my individual approach in a proper structure. I'm going to provide you the proper structure as I have been providing with the earlier lectures as well. So introduction, basically, you can start with the High Seas Treaty offers a mechanism to implement sustainable use of marine resources which lie outside the national jurisdictions. Okay. Then you can link, start with the body. Now you have to realize particular keywords are being used. So we have examine, discuss, elaborate. So here two keywords are combined together, analyze and then critically. Analyze, basically we have to delve. We have to ponder deep into the topic and study it, break it into parts, study it, and then provide an appropriate conclusion. But whenever critically is attached or prefixed with analyze, we have to also write about the pros and cons and finally give a conclusion which should be balanced in nature. As a civil servant or potential civil servant, you cannot afford to take sides. Okay, so continuing, there are two parts, key provisions and potential impacts. So these are two parts. Okay, so it has the following these objectives, main objectives. You can start with the subheading objectives of the treaty, spacing, and everything you can do on your own. So we have already discussed the four objectives, basically the conservation part, which will be, you can elaborate on that, the establishment and maintenance of MPAs, asking the countries to protect and conserve even the MPAs of that area, and sustainable use for whether you want to do scientific research. Okay, so one is the conservation, then we have the EIAs or the environmental impact assessment. Some important points how to elaborate, not repeat the same thing again. So assessment will be public in nature, and moreover, if any country or sovereign nation it is conducting any activity which hampers the biodiversity in the high seas, then it is held it is to be held accountable. Then we have the equitable equitable access and benefit sharing and mutual benefit sharing, because when it comes to the genetic resources, I'm just writing the keyword, so it should be available to one and all. And what else was there? To technology transfer, technology provision of funds and technologies to other countries so that they can establish their principles and marine protected areas, and they can conduct explorations and scientific research. Okay, then we come to the second part. Now just don't try to not directly write the heading itself. So you can start like this, that after writing the body of the first part, that like all other treaties, this one also comes with certain caveats. So you can take the help of the same objectives. So first of all, mutual benefit and sharing is there as one of the objectives. Okay. So what about the resources which are non-genetic in nature or the common resources? There is no specific protocol. So that protocol is missing. Because specifically, if we want to conserve one species, okay, we have to conserve the genetic diversity. There's so many species in the marine ecosystems. Okay. Then security. So there is no proper policing mechanism. Like for the territorial waters, we have the coast guard, we have the navies. Now in the high seas, ultimately, who will fund or finance? One, America or India or Ecuador cannot send its own ships. Like there has to be some common, like we have a UN peacekeeping force for resolving conflicts. So there has to be grouping, so that policing mechanism is not there. Okay. Then conflict of interests. Obviously, we have discussed this point in detail earlier also. So, for example, coastal states, even on trivial issues, not trivial for us, for like, for example, Kachativu Island or the arrest of fishermen, Indian fishermen by Sri Lanka, and we know our friendly neighborhood, China. So, it you might have known, come across the nine dash line. So, it is building artificial reefs, artificial islands, so that it gains more control over EEZ. So, this can spill out further also. Okay, coastal states, the sovereign issues, fine. The environmental impact assessment, so that also is a time taking process. Already this treaty has taken 20 years to negotiate and finally agreed upon. So what constitutes all the like India has its environmental impact assessment, like you study in for the GS3 environment. But every country has its own mode of environmental impact assessment, so that has to be common uniformly. Otherwise, every country will say, okay, we are going to do in this way, we are going to do in this way. Fine. And finally, the methods of research, whether it be scientific or methods of the exploration, how are these going to be streamlined? What procedures, what procedures are going to guide these principles for navigating the high seas? So these are some, so you can develop some points or your own also. And finally, you have to write an apt conclusion. So you can write, can despite some shortcomings, once ratified, the high seas treaty will pave the way forward, not only for sustainable use of marine resources, but also establishment of a blue economy. So you can write something unique. This just struck to me. Otherwise, it is a common. So this blue economy, basically aquaculture, pisciculture, how and resources, exploitation of resources. So India is also aiming to become a blue economy to sustainably access and sustainable commercial exploitation for scientific research and other conservation of genetic biodiversity. So in this, you can complete 250 words, 15 marks, and you can fetch good marks. So this is the topic which was concluded today. Again, recently in the news, heat dome was there. So we have discussed some aspects of that topic in one of the lectures. This heat waves, you can visit that lecture or revise it. And I had also made a lecture or video on Indian Ocean and its significance. So there a lot of aspects regarding which you can connect with the high seas treaty you can find there. So just keep calm, keep studying, preparing for mains or whenever you plan to give the exam. Jai Hind.